And of course, we have smartphones and tablets. Some people call them phablets, but I don't hear that much anymore. Um, One of the hardest things to do as a game developer, whatever discipline you get into, is figuring out how you're going to scale your game. Your game has a certain amount of scope, it has depth, it has levels, it has all these things, whatever type of game it is. And so how do you translate that from, say, I'm going to ship it on, it's on Steam, it's going to be available for the Switch, it's going to be available for PC, Mac, it's going to be on tablet, iOS devices, Android devices. Well, it's a huge undertaking to be able to scale your game to those systems. It's not an easy thing. There's definitely support software to get that to happen. And with sound, we have, again, the middleware I keep bringing up, where you can create custom setups for different operating systems, different platforms. And so I could say, well, for anyone who has iOS, I'll allow 8 channels of audio. For anybody who has a PC, I'll allow up to 32 channels of audio, and so forth. Phones vary, so even if you had like an Android device, it may not have the capability of a deluxe Android device. It depends what chip they're using, and it's beyond the scope of this class to get into those kind of deep specifics. Suffice to say that phones and tablets have far fewer voices that they can, or channels that they can handle, and there's no hard and fast amounts for how many they can use. It tends to be more about the independent, more of like a stream than a channel, which is more just like fire and forget kind of audio. It just sends stuff out. It's a slightly different process, but it is challenging to try to figure out how to make a mix work on here. Like with Marvel Puzzle Quest, I had to come up with a mix for console at the time, which was it had to be PS4, it had to be the Xbox. It also had to be on iOS, Android, and they had all different capabilities. And so I had to have like kind of the minimum system requirements for those and set them up in some middleware software. So this is everything we just talked about. This is just something you can look at. You could find this on Wikipedia. Actually, this is a history of game audio here. But I've added my channels on the right side and some other technical stuff. I don't have the next generation here. Okay, that's still yet to come. Once it's released, I'll have more information for you. All right. Any questions about consoles, history of game audio, anything to this point? Now that I know the hand raising function is working. Anybody? We're good? All right. And let's see here. Okay. So Victoria had asked earlier about home audio, kind of the PC. And again, they tended to have more power, more capabilities than, I apologize, I can reverse that. My brain said one thing and the text said another thing. Home computers did not have the capability of home arcade audio, but that would change as we get closer to the 90s and beyond. Okay, game audio for home computers did evolve on a different path, and everything they needed in a home console, you'd have graphics and sound, but the PC was a scalable type of thing, especially for the PC, which is still very, I have this sound card, I have this graphics card, you kind of swap boards and this and that, right? Consoles tended to be, this is what you get. You might be able to upgrade the memory, but less adaptable. Okay, but the base quality for PCs or Macs today is great. I mean, the motherboard usually has everything you need with one audio chip that handles kind of everything. Unless you have like a real budget computer, like a notebook computer or something like entry-level PC, they'll cheap out on the audio, and sometimes you'll get a noisy processor that picks up noise from all over the chassis of the computer, and it comes out as like background noise with if you've ever had the volume up on your computer and you're typing, sometimes you hear like little weird blips or noise glitches. That's noise from the processor and the wiring and everything. That's a sign of a bad audio chip. So this isn't as long as the console history, but it's concise. In the late 70s, the Apple II came out, which really started the home computer revolution. Okay, look, honey, I've got this giant cash register on the table. I thought I'd do our stocks. There's they're furiously typing away there at the breakfast table. You see two giant 5.25-inch floppy disk drives with your amber or green screen monitor. And there it is. It had no sound chip. Bad idea. It had a toggle circuit, which means that it had these little clicks, little voltage clicks it would send to the speaker, which was dreadful. It wasn't even good for its time because there are other computers that came out about that time or soon after that had far better sounding audio. And I want you to know what this sounds like, just for history's sake, what a toggle circuit sounds like. Here's a helicopter rescue game called Shoplifter, and you're rescuing these prisoners from enemy lines and bringing them back. This is all you can do with a toggle circuit. Here we go. There you go. It's pretty bad. Even when it came out, people would say, including myself, that's pretty bad. But they just wanted to get the computer out, and they decided that they would spend too much time with the audio. It didn't matter because in Apple's case, it was just such a great computer, home computer, that I guess people were willing to let it slide. But it got better as time went on. There was a long line of these cash register looking computers coming out. We had the Commodore 64, which is a big one. IBM had their own PC. They had a PC Junior that came out soon after. Atari had a 400 and 800 and XL series machines. Was based off of kind of somewhere between their arcade units and Atari 2600. So anyway, I lived on a block where a lot of kids, they're all getting like home computers, and I had the Texas Instruments computer, which is down here. I had a friend who had a Commodore 64. I had another pal who had an Atari 800. I had somebody else I knew down the street who had a PC, and we'd all have different games, and sometimes we'd have the same game. And I realized then, I think I knew when I was like a kid that things sounded different. The same game would sound different on different PCs, and that's because the processors are just a little bit different. Okay, the same tones, the same frequencies, but generated in a different way. I'll show you what I mean. Here's a platformer called Miner 2049er, and this is a game where just pop it up. Oops, sorry for the volume. Now everybody's deaf. We bring that down. Sorry about that. So you have a little platformer here, and you got your character who's trying to jump around and get these little gems and things in a mine, but there's also these evil mutants running around. Let's just listen to what it sounds like on the Texas Instruments computer. Thank you. So I think I prefer the Atari audio there. It sounds really slick, a very smooth, silky kind of audio. It's got a little bit of chorusing. It's like taking two sounds and changing the frequency of one just slightly back and forth, and it creates this wavering full effect. It's called a chorus. Nobody was doing stuff like that. Atari was way ahead in terms of their sound capabilities. And generally, these computers had about 3 or 4 sound channels, one or more that could do noise or variable tones. And it all came out of one speaker, your TV speaker, which is mono, right? Okay, things got interesting in the early 80s. MIDI, the Musical Instrument Digital Interface, became the standard for musical instruments, drums, and other equipment. This way, you could take, if you had MIDI capability, it's just a bit of hardware in your device. You could take a drum machine, a keyboard, any kind of electronic music device, record your performance, not the actual physical sound of the device, but record the events, the notes that you played, at what volume it was at. Did you hold down a sustain pedal? Did you change programs? Is it on the left? Is it on the right? So panning, volume, events, those types of things were recorded. The burden of playback was on the target device. In other words, I record something in my studio or whatever, game development studio, recording studio. It's a MIDI file. It only takes up hundreds of bytes or maybe 2K or 10K or something, because it's just events, just data. And then the playback was dependent on what you had at home on your computer. So if I had a PC with a great sound card, all right, I would have a much better playback performance. So music is performed and saved as a MIDI file. The events about it are saved, right? And then some sound card, look at this gigantic Apple sound card here, for the PC plays back, or Apple plays back the MIDI file using an onboard synthesizer. And they varied wildly, right? The MIDI performance would be heard in the game. And so you'd have the same notes, but the quality of, or if it was an orchestral piece of music, you might have these terrible beeps and boops on one card, or like pretty good approximations for its time of orchestral instruments on another sound card, depending on how much money you wanted to spend to throw at it, you know. And here we have Day of the Tentacle, which I'm going to play for you in just a second. All right, so sound cards. I had this card here back in the late 80s. I think it was like 1989. I got this card, and it was the greatest thing. It was $100, and it was a lot of money for me to save as a teenager in 1989. But I blast away the PC sound barrier, they say. And so it had some good onboard capabilities. It had a chip that had a wavetable on it. So it were kind of predetermined complex waveforms that would be generated based on the MIDI instrument that was playing. So if you had a MIDI string instrument like a violin, it would try to approximate a violin. If you had a drum, kick drum, and the snare, it would try to approximate that. And it did an okay job. This was another conundrum back in the 80s and 90s where audio designers had to think about the different types of sound card the gamer might have. And you'd have to test your stuff on all of those cards, or whichever ones you could get a hold of, to see if it translated well across those different devices, you know, and just kind of do the best you can to make the best experience. Sometimes you could have the user choose, do you have a Sound Blaster? Do you have a Turtle Beach card? Do you have a Roland synthesizer? And then it would play the appropriate MIDI file, okay? So let's just hear what a MIDI file sounds like. Here's that streaming dialogue off the disc that I was telling Victoria about that you're going to hear. In addition, that's happening on the disc being played. In addition, the music is being played by the sound card, okay, and the sound effects, if any, are being generated as samples. Okay, Stanley has a question. Yes, Stanley, go ahead. See if I can get this.
Hi, I wanted to clarify. So read chapter 2, 1 and 2 for Wednesday, right, or Thursday?
As long as you read it by Thursday, yep, that'll be okay.
Okay, thanks.